Frederick Sedon was born in Liverpool on January 21, 1872, to William Sedon and Mary Ann. On December 31, 1893, he married Margaret Ann, and the couple had 5 children: William James Sedon, Margaret Sedon, Frederick Henry Sedon Jr., Ada Sedon, and Lillian Louisa Agnes Emma Sedon. His father also lived with them. Sedon was once a Freemason, initiated into Liverpool's Stanley Lodge No. 1325 in 1901. He resigned the following year to move south. In 1909, Sedon purchased a 14-room house at 63 Tollington Park, near London's Finsbury Park, and worked as a superintendent of collectors for the National Insurance Company. Obsessed with making money, Sedon ran a second-hand clothing business under his wife's name and speculated in real estate. Seeking to swindle someone, he and his wife advertised the second floor of their London home for rent. Eliza Mary Barrow, an eccentric 47-year-old spinster and near neighbor, responded and moved in on July 26, 1910, with her ward, 8-year-old orphan Ernest George Grant. Barrow had previously shared lodgings with her cousin, Frank Vondera, but hoped the new arrangement with Sedon would be cheaper. Easily influenced and as eager to make money as Sedon, Barrow was quickly convinced by him to transfer a controlling interest in all of her savings and annuities, including £1,500 of Indian stock, to him. In exchange, Sedon promised to care for her for the rest of her life, providing a small annuity and allowing her to live in his home rent-free. In August of 1911, the Sedons, Barrow, and her young ward went on holiday to Southend. Upon their return, Sedon's daughter, Maggie, was sent to buy a 3-penny packet of flypaper from the local chemist. Shortly after, Barrow began experiencing severe stomach pains. The local doctor was called and prescribed bismuth and morphine. On September 9th, he visited her again, but by the following Monday, her condition had worsened. Nevertheless, she refused to go to the hospital. She improved slightly for a few days, but remained bedridden. On September 13th, she dictated a will to Sedon, who executed it, and it was witnessed by his relatives. On the morning of September 14th at 6:15, while being cared for by Mrs. Sedon, Barrow died. Sedon went to the doctor, who issued a death certificate without seeing the body, claiming he was unable to attend due to overwork caused by a current epidemic. On September 15th, Sedon arranged a cheap funeral with the undertaker, keeping a small commission for himself. Barrow was buried in a common burial plot, despite her family having a vault in Highgate Cemetery West. Sedon explained this by saying Barrow's family had previously snubbed his daughter, and he did not want his family to be treated the same way. He believed that missing the funeral might teach Barrow's family better manners. Immediately after the funeral, the Sedon family left for a 2-week holiday in Southend. Suspicious of the suddenness of Barrow's death and the hasty funeral arrangements, her cousin, Frank Vondera, arrived to take over her estate. However, Sedon claimed that nothing was left, as he had paid the substantial funeral expenses and the cost of Ernest Grant's upkeep. The Vondera family then went to the police with their suspicions. On November 15, 1911, Barrow's body was exhumed. Sir William Wilcox, the senior Home Office specialist, and young pathologist Bernard Spilsbury, who had already made a name for himself in the Crippen case, examined the body and found about 2 grains of arsenic. As in the Crippen trial, Spilsbury proved to be an outstanding witness for the prosecution, effectively handling cross-examination and demonstrating highly effective forensic techniques. Sedon and his wife became the primary suspects in what had escalated into a murder investigation. During their trial at the Old Bailey, the prosecution, led by Attorney General Sir Rufus Isaacs, demonstrated that Margaret Sedon had previously purchased a substantial amount of flypaper, which contained arsenic. The prosecution posited that the poison used to kill Barrow had been extracted by soaking the flypaper in water. Renowned barrister Edward Marshall Hall defended the Sedons, vigorously denying the poisoning claims and asserting that Barrow had died from ingesting a medical preparation containing arsenic. Despite his counsel's advice, Sedon insisted on testifying in his own defense. His arrogant and condescending demeanor reportedly alienated the jury. His credibility was further damaged by the implausible claim that Barrow might have drunk water from the dishes of flypaper placed in her room to repel flies. Despite a determined defense, the jury deliberated for just 1 hour before finding him guilty. Margaret Sedon was acquitted of any involvement in the murder. Marshall Hall consistently maintained that Sedon would have been acquitted if he had not insisted on testifying. He frequently cited this case as a cautionary example to clients about the risk of giving evidence in their own defense. A former Freemason, Sedon was asked by the clerk of the court if he had anything to say as to why the sentence of death should not be passed against him. In response, Sedon gave a lengthy appeal directly to the judge, Sir Thomas Townsend Bucknell, invoking their shared Masonic ties and appealing in the name of the great architect of the universe to overturn the jury's guilty verdict. The judge, visibly moved, reportedly said, "It is not for me to harrow your feelings. Try to make peace with your Maker. We both belong to the same brotherhood, and though that can have no influence with me, this is painful beyond words to have to say what I am saying. But our brotherhood does not encourage crime. It condemns it." Sedon replied that he had already made peace with his Maker. Mr. Justice Bucknell then pronounced the sentence of death. Sedon was hanged by John Ellis and Thomas Pierpoint at Pentonville Prison on April 18, 1912. After his execution, his widow, Margaret Ann Sedon, returned to Liverpool and married James Donald Cameron on November 4, 1912, less than 7 months after her husband's execution. She later moved to the United States with Cameron, taking her 5 children with her. William Kemmler was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1860 to German immigrant parents who both struggled with alcoholism. He left school at age 10, unable to read or write, and began working in his father's butcher shop. Kemmler's father died of an infection sustained during a drunken brawl, and his mother succumbed to complications related to alcoholism. By the late 1870s, Kemmler was described as slender, with dark brown hair, and he was bilingual, speaking both English and German. Following the deaths of his parents, he entered the peddling business and eventually saved enough money to buy a horse and cart. However, he also developed a heavy drinking habit. In one notable incident, after a series of drinking binges with friends, he claimed he could jump his horse and cart over an 8-foot fence while the cart was still attached. The attempt failed disastrously, destroying both the cart and his goods. Known to his friends as Philadelphia Billy, his frequent drinking sprees made him a well-known figure in the saloons of his Buffalo neighborhood. On the same day, William Kemmler was accused of murdering his common-law wife, Matilda Ziegler, with a hatchet. The New York Times described the murder. William Kemmler was a vegetable peddler in the slums of Buffalo, New York. An alcoholic, on March 29, 1889, he was recovering from a drinking binge the night before when he became enraged with his girlfriend, Tilly Ziegler. He accused her of stealing from him and preparing to run away with a friend of his. When the argument reached a peak, Kemmler calmly went to the barn, grabbed a hatchet, and returned to the house. He struck Tilly repeatedly, killing her. He then went to a neighbor's house and announced that he had just murdered his girlfriend. Kemmler's murder trial moved swiftly. He was convicted of first-degree murder on May 10th, and 3 days later he was sentenced to death. He was set to be the first person executed by electric chair under New York's new execution law, which replaced hanging with electrocution. A chair was already prepared at Auburn State Prison. However, prominent electrical power developers, including George Westinghouse, opposed the use of their technology in executions. A lawyer filed an appeal, arguing that the electric chair violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. New York had introduced death by electrocution on January 1, 1888, the first law of its kind. After Kemmler's conviction, it was decided his sentence would be carried out at Auburn Prison using the new electric chair, invented in 1881 by Alfred Southwick, a dentist from Buffalo, New York. Despite 9 years of development and legislation, Kemmler's lawyers contended that electrocution constituted cruel and unusual punishment. However, the appeal was denied on October 9, 1889, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the decision in the case, ruling that death by electrocution did not constitute cruel and unusual punishment. On the morning of August 6, 1890, William Kemmler was awakened at 5 a.m. He quickly dressed in a suit, necktie, and white shirt. After breakfast and some prayer, the top of his head was shaved. At 6:38 a.m., Kemmler entered the execution room, where Warden Charles Durston introduced him to the 17 witnesses present. Kemmler looked at the chair and said, "Gentlemen, I wish you all good luck. I believe I am going to a good place, and I am ready to go." Witnesses noted that Kemmler remained composed throughout the process, showing no signs of fear or resistance. He sat in the chair, but had to stand up again so a hole could be cut in his suit for a second electrical lead. Once this was done, Kemmler sat back down, was strapped in, had his face covered, and a metal restraint was placed on his shaved head. He calmly remarked, "Take it easy and do it properly. I am in no hurry." Durston replied, "Goodbye, William," and ordered the switch to be thrown. The generator was set to deliver 1,000 volts, believed sufficient to induce quick unconsciousness and cardiac arrest. The chair had been tested the previous day by electrocuting a horse. Current passed through Kemmler for 17 seconds. When the power was turned off, Dr. Edward Charles Spitzka declared Kemmler dead. However, witnesses noticed he was still breathing. Spitzka and Dr. Carlos Frederick MacDonald examined Kemmler, and upon confirming he was still alive, Spitzka shouted, "Have the current turned on, quick, no delay." In the second attempt, 2,000 volts were applied. Blood vessels under Kemmler's skin ruptured and bled, and some witnesses reported that his body caught fire. The New York Times described an awful odor filling the room as hair and flesh around the electrodes singed. The stench of burning flesh was overwhelming, causing several spectators to feel nauseated and try to leave the room. The entire execution took approximately 8 minutes. Competing newspapers seized on the gruesome details, with sensational headlines. The New York Times declared far worse than hanging. Westinghouse later remarked, "They would have done better using an axe." Kemmler was buried within the prison grounds where his execution took place. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to join our community. We upload every Monday and Thursday at 4 p.m. For more content like this, be sure to check out our other videos on the channel. You can also follow us on our other social media platforms for uploads and updates. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.